Hello and welcome to the 6th episode of The 4 at 4. Your panel for the show is comprised of 4 published authors: Melody Brooks with melodybrook.com, marriage and family counselor, corporate consultant, actress, producer, and advocate; Monica Shimonik, who will be joining us in the future but may not be here this week. She has Moms Unshackled. She's a certified health coach, lobbyist, activist, and advocate. Sherry Palmer with Fixed Family Courts, constitutional scholar, co-founder of the National Family Law Policy Center, activist and advocate. And, of course, Catherine McWillie, who's the founder of CustodyCalculations.com, a retired LAPD officer, parental alienation and CPS conflict expert and advocate. And I'm your host, Lorelai. Today's topic is what to do when your spouse is financially abusing you.
Well, hi, everyone. So our topic today, thank you, Melody, for offering this topic for the show, is when your spouse is financially abusing you while you're still married. So, Melody, you want to tell us why you thought of talking about this today?
Well, I work with a lot of couples, and I realize that it's kind of a theme that happens a lot. And I hear men talking about it as though women were the only ones doing it. And I think women maybe do it more than men, but I've certainly seen men do it as well. And so to define what that is, basically the way I look at it is, you marry someone and you have sort of an implicit agreement that you are partners and that you're sharing finances, care for the home, care for the kids, caring for each other. And often what happens is that one spouse will decide, you know what, I just don't want to work anymore. Or one spouse will decide, and this is more common with women, which is the money I earn is for me, the money that you earn is for me. So I get to spend all of our money, and that leaving the other spouse really carrying the burden for all the finances for the family, even though there may be two spouses working. And so I think that a lot of times what happens is that women have a sort of distorted view around money. And anyway, I just see it happening a lot, and I just thought it would be something that would be important to talk about, because I don't think people are aware that that's abuse.
How do you think that makes guys feel? Like, do they come to you and tell you how that makes them feel when they marry someone who they think is a equal partner, and then all of a sudden they're their sole support?
Well, they feel betrayed, obviously. Then, especially if you have a wife then that or spouse, whichever it may be, that is spending money like crazy when they're not bringing in, or they're the spouse's money and they're spending their own money without consulting or discussing that with their partner. So they're not at all on the same page about what.
I think the key point you have there is consulting it with your partner, because to me it almost sounds like at first you were saying traditional values is now abuse.
Yes.
So when you say traditional values, though, Lorelai, so you're saying that even in your age groups, are they still feeling like it's a traditional value, like the girls that that they should not have to work when they're married?
I've had a few friends growing up that I used to, granted, they were coworkers of mine, so it's kind of funny, but they believed that once they were married, that was how things were. They would take care of the house, they would take care of the kids, and their spouse would take care of the finances, and they would not marry their partner until he was able to take care of the finances and she would no longer have to work. But I think it's also cultural. I have cultural friends who they believe that, the woman stays home and the man should bring in most of the income. However, they also worked with me. So, I think it depends. It is kind of changing generationally, but I think it's still there, that there's some of that's okay. And sometimes it's the man. I know men, I have a friend of mine who stays home. He takes care of the kids because it's more financially responsible for them, because they can't afford the health care with what he was making before, the child care.
That situation is quite different, because it's a matter of that agreement that you have between you of who's going to do what, but what I often will see is one partner who not financially lets go, but just goes, you know what, I'm not going to take care of the house. I'm not going to take care of the kids. I'm just going to do nothing and spend. And it's pay somebody to take care of the kids, pay somebody to clean the house, pay somebody.
So it's not an agreement, and right. And the problem becomes you cannot legally force that other person to work. You cannot force them to work. There are no laws to help you with that. Right. So essentially now you're enslaved, right? Right. So is that how they feel like when they come to you? Are they like, hey, I feel like a slave in my own relationship?
Yes, and they feel absolutely emotionally trapped, because especially people who marry leave because of their faith, that the divorce is not an option, right? Then they're really trapped. And that they're trapped in a situation where they feel like there's no way out but to allow their spouse to do whatever the heck they want to do.
So when you have the extremely religious people who don't believe in divorce, but now you're saying, the more traditional values of not completely supporting them are not applying to them either. I don't know if it's lack of agreement between the two of them or someone's just not pulling their weight in any other way. But do you think that's also fueled by the change in the cultural aspect of what women are expected to carry the jobs and the household now in those situations? And also, are we valuing people based solely on what they make and what their jobs are?
Well, it's interesting, when we were talking about what the subject would be today, I went in an entirely different direction. I was going on spouses who hid incomes for years, bankrupt companies, who had spouses sign over the homes without their knowledge or consent.
Which is enough. Yeah.
Right. Or, other spouses who were supporting other families in other countries that their wife or husband was unaware of, or husbands or wives who would only work 20 hours. So I was going in a completely different direction.
But I totally agree that I could see that as absolute financial abuse, because if you're hiding things, or if you're signing off on loans that you're not agreeing, or you're signing your partner's name or doing things like that, then absolutely you're putting your spouse in a financial situation they didn't agree on and taking advantage of that. The one that Melody's talking about, I do understand where you're coming from, but I also don't understand if people will take it too far and call abuse over things that they just decide the woman should carry jobs and everything at home, if that makes sense.
What's funny, Lorelai, is I only see financial abuse cases in divorces. I only see it like during the time that they've filed for divorce. And I know that people have talked about it like prior to them actually divorcing, but it's just interesting how there's nothing they can do during their marriage, but then it takes a divorce for them to actually like try to argue that they have some sort of damage, right? Yes. I don't know what they can do in their marriage, because if the other person, I think what it boils down to is how did that other person believe before they got married? I don't think most of them actually talk about it much.
Right. I think that's part of the problem, the lack of communication about it beforehand. We get sucked into this romantic idea of, oh, I'm in love with this person, they adore me, I adore them, we're going to be happily ever after, and they don't really talk about the important things when they get married, and they carry with them all of these assumptions about what marriage is and what their role as husband and wife is,
and they have the idea of their spouse in their mind, which may not be everything. Like, they may have created other ideals, like, oh, they agree with me on this, without actually having discussed it. And I totally agree that the lack of communication is there, and I've seen that in a lot of the younger generation too. And then they pull the whole, oh, they bait and switched me.
Well, that's why I think prenup. I disagree that there's nothing you can do during the marriage. I think that's why prenups are so important, and they're certainly undervalued in this country. And it's a contract. It's putting out expectations that you have of the marriage and being very practical. about what are your jobs, what are your expectations, if the person doesn't do this, it's a way to go into something as important as a marriage, discussing aspects you wouldn't normally talk about if you didn't enter into a prenup. And discussing the financials is a very basic component of a prenup. And identifying who will stay home with the children, certainly that can always change. But if you enter in, unaware of these topics, then, you're really just kicking it down the road to when it then becomes
I think that's
for a divorce.
Because I think most people, when they think about prenups, they think about that if you are a person who already has significant wealth, and those are the people that tend to move toward prenups. But the idea of moving toward a prenup, you don't have significant wealth.
But see, that's why I'm saying it's undervalued. That's why I'm saying it's undervalued as to its importance that it can play in keeping a marriage intact. And even upon entering a marriage, the whole goal of prenups, in my mind, is having realistic expectations and protecting the assets as they occur.
Well, you know what I
would sign that, honestly. Like, no offense, Catherine. Sorry to cut you off, Sherry. I would not sign a prenup that defines the exact roles of what you're going into the marriage with expectations. I feel like it should be discussed, but I feel like there's too many unknowns and too many changes, and people will go and pull that back on you later, and you're gonna end up being pushed more to a divorce because they're gonna be like, you signed this, and you said you'd fill this role all the time, and I'd be like,
I was gonna say that. I was gonna say, people who have cultures where they don't believe in divorce, they're not going to like it, because that's what they're going to think of is, how do you enforce it? The only enforcement would be...
Oh, you muted yourself. You hit your mute button.
So I have to type her.
The only
I unmuted her.
Divorce.
You muted me?
You muted yourself. I unmuted you.
Thank you. It's every time a call comes through, it does that. But yeah, so the thing is, what's the enforcement of the contract? How do you enforce it and not go through a divorce?
Well, here's the thing. First of all, the concept that I'm talking about is very unnatural for us. But don't you remember when they said the same thing about pet insurance? And now it's very much a part of our society as a protection of the animals. And I'm by no means identifying people in that same genre, other than to say, listen, there's a lot of things we can be doing differently to better support families so that people aren't so surprised. And Lorelai, I completely agree with you. When you're young, you're like, oh, I'm in love. We're going to work everything out. There's never going to be a misunderstanding. Our life is perfect. But when you're older, you realize that really there's steps we could have taken when we were younger to ensure that we had a more success.
What you're saying, Lorelai, is that you don't, because things change. Maybe you plan to be a breadwinner, but then you have children, or you get ill, or something, to where you can't work or you can't fulfill that role.
Right.
And then what happens?
Right. And then you have someone holding something over your head. You didn't fulfill it. You weren't able to achieve this. And I don't think I was going into it quite, Catherine, with the whole starstruck love thing. I've always been a very logistical. I sat my husband down. We discussed everything. And even when I decided to make a change in my life, we discussed it again. And we agreed on that. I think it was more just the fact that because I'm young, life happens. I may not get the job I want. I may not get I may not be able to fulfill the roles that I would originally have wanted to agree to. So I'm not going to sign into a contract with that. As a partnership, I feel you have to work together to establish those boundaries and change with the boundaries. And that the main thing for me on whether or not it's a financial abuse or whether or not it's something that was addressed properly initially is whether or not you communicated it.
Right, but you might be the exception. More and more people are entering marriage with possibly unrealistic expectations, or one person enters it with realistic expectations and the other doesn't. But that's what a really good contract of understanding, and maybe if we change the name, that would make people feel more comfortable. But really there needs to be a lot more discussion. I mean, I know families that got married and then one of the spouses says, I'm not working more than 20 hours a week. And, and then the other person accepted that until they no longer could.
Okay.
And actually fewer people are getting married now. The numbers keep going down. There's one thing Michael Hiller a while back he had suggested, Catherine, and you might like it. Instead of calling these prenup, he actually calls them something it's a sort of marital agreement, right?
Which
like you're saying,
I get where you're going with renaming it and calling it whatever you will. It's still not something I personally would agree with. So I'm gonna have a pretty black and white stance there, because I feel like the solution already exists. Premarital counseling, make a premarital agreement that you'll continue that counseling through your marriage, and go to a counselor who specializes in knowing what to discuss first.
Let me finish what kind of agreement he's talking about. It's not just changing the name of it. It's not a prenup at all. What he's worked on for years and he helps people enter into is an agreement that's more like, okay, let me give you an example. One of them was a grandparent that offered to provide a certain amount of money at the end of each year that they successfully remained married, and that they completed a certain number of hours of marital counseling throughout that year, and so achieved certain things in their marriage and with their growth in their communication. So they would actually get some bonus money at the end of each year. It doesn't have to be anything huge. It can be $100, $200, $500, right? Because a lot of people aren't wealthy. But what it did is it gave a grandparent a way to participate, not have to throw all that investment in them at the time of the marriage and then find that the marriage didn't work out. But it was a way for a grandparent to participate, strengthen a marriage, and to encourage that young couple to work on that relationship. Because I think what happens is people get complacent. They no longer feel like they need to work on that relationship. We have something biological, right, Melody, that tells us we've caught that person. And now we don't need to work as hard on that relationship.
Well, what about, I know we're sort of getting this conversation going only about the prenup or a marital agreement, but I think we should really also address what could people be doing during the marriage to protect their credit, to be more aware of what the other spouse may be doing. Because, as you know, Sherry, or all of us know, all of these issues come into play during the divorce process. So I think if parents were checking their credit yearly, as a safety measure to say, listen, my spouse may be uncomfortable being forthright about the monies that are being spent, or it may be taking more money and they're trying to do the best they can. And maybe if the other parent had this information and knew a better idea of what the financials were at that time.
Well, there's something I learned that you can do. Like it's state by state though, Catherine, but I agree. There needs to be like some credit checking, but also laws. States need to pass laws that allow people to be independent with some of those decisions regarding their credit in their marriage. And one is they should be able to decline getting a credit card with the person. So it shouldn't be one person can get the credit card and not the other without permission. If they do, it should be just on them individually. And I'll give you a quick example. My youngest daughter went to buy a car, and my husband didn't agree. He didn't want to enter into that liability, and I wouldn't have been able to actually co-sign for her if it was going to create a liability for him. The auto dealership brought a form to me and said, this can state here that it excludes your spouse. And at first I was leery. I was like, are you sure it does that? Because it's our understanding that no matter what I do, he's liable too. And it was an actual legal document that said your spouse did not agree to this. They are not part of this. This is not their liability, period, even though we're married.
Was that in Texas?
Yes.
Really?
That was in Texas within the last 2-3 years. Yep.
Huh.
Well, credit cards require a signature of a spouse to get, and yet a spouse has signed those signatures for the other person all the time.
The credit card credit cards that I've signed for had no requirement of my spouse being on them.
Same. I can get my own, and now if I want to get like a loan or a credit card in both of our names, then I do have to have the power of attorney or have him there.
So
I think they're getting better. I think the laws are getting better on that.
But we didn't talk about, so let's say you love your spouse to death, but they are just sending you into bankruptcy. What can they do in that situation? They don't want a divorce, but the other person just cannot control their spending.
So my tip would be that everybody should take a basic financial class, learn and understand your credit and your finances, and no one partner should be solely in charge of the finances. I think that both of them should at least have discussion of what's going on with your finances, even if one manages making sure the bills are paid.
You know, the problem is that even though that you might suggest that they do that, and I agree that that's when you're going into prenups, I think that's part of what needs to happen is you need to have those kinds of consultations. But I also know that these people who are willing to abuse in that way, they don't really care, and they're not going to go. They're not going to cooperate. They're not going to participate. They don't care. They're just going to spend, and they're just going to take advantage of their situation.
They're going to use, they're going to use emotional sabotage.
Yeah.
No.
Hence the prenup.
Right.
But then you got to get divorced.
No,
Divorce it.
no, but you can have penalties, you know. I mean, that's what people don't realize. Like some people feel really strong about weight, and now there's prenups that include if you gain more than 80 pounds or 60 pounds or 40, whatever. There's all sorts of things being put into these prenups or marital agreements. But we have.
How do they enforce them? How do they enforce them, Catherine, without getting divorced?
Well, I think that there are some measures that they can take, but prenups are still in development on those issues. There's a financial penalty in some cases. You know, there's a requirement to go to special sessions dealing with finances. There's certain penalties that are put in place that the other parent has to comply with. Otherwise, you know, it might be a part of the agreement is that they have to take over all financial responsibilities on those cards, period.
So
the thing is that a marriage is a contract. It already is a contract. So the moment you get married, you're entering into a contract. And I think that what we're doing is entering into a
contract that we don't know any of the details about.
Right. That none of the details are worked out ahead of time. It's just an open-ended contract saying, yes, we agree to be married together.
And the government changes at any time when you move from state to state. It's ridiculous.
Yes.
So why wouldn't people feel like they can do whatever they want? Government does it.
Right, exactly. Why not?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you haven't signed a prenup, you're already married, or your spouse refuses to sign a prenup, how would you financially protect yourself?
Well, I think if they're unwilling to sign the prenup, then that might be a warning sign right there, you know, or if you have a prenup specific to the terms of the financials, you have to understand where the problems are occurring. But financials, then what you would do is put a notification on your credit report. I do not, you know, you can put a paragraph of so many words with each of the 3 credit bureaus, and you put on there that I am financially responsible for only cards that I take out in my name, which must be, you know, confirmed with, you know, certain steps, and that I do not approve any credit cards in my name to be used jointly by my spouse. That's some things I tell even parents who've been divorced. They find out that their spouses, their ex-spouses are still taking out credit cards in their names, joint credit cards.
I'll tell you what I would do if I was in a marriage like that. Again, I would quit working too. So, okay, we're both broke now. They're sending me into bankruptcy. I know it sounds ridiculous. You can't probably do it if you have kids. But guys, if you don't have kids, don't work like a slave for them.
Right.
And the other job, quit working.
Piece of that, of course, is that in most states, if you have one spouse that's not working and the other spouse is working, if you do get divorced, you end up having to pay spousal support to this person who is refused.
So you better quit early. Yeah, you better quit early. Don't let them.
So
by the way, that's no guarantee either, because the courts can order you, even if you're not working, if they think you've intentionally quit and you're not making income specifically with the intent to harm the other person, then
if it happens later on, but I'm talking early on. If people start doing this, like Lorelai mentioned, first year of marriage, things like that, if it happens early on, you got to get smart to it real quick. And if you don't want to be taken advantage of, you do something immediately.
At that point, though, you might as well leave. If you can't work it out,
Right.
if you can't communicate, and you're going to play games like that where you have to quit and lose everything potentially, then you're not in a healthy relationship anyway.
But sometimes people need to be shocked out of something, so I don't necessarily
well,
think
hopefully by my age, at the minimum, they don't need that kind of shock value. But one of my concerns is that I do have friends that are married on the younger side, and their spouses go into it without completely understanding how to share finances and discuss that stuff. So they already have credit cards together, and one of them was supposed to pay their card off and the other one was supposed to pay their card off. And they were giving them a little financial freedom to be able to do that. Here's the money, you pay it off, you be in charge of this one card. Well, then they secretly run it up on video games and things like that, and they find out that it's defaulted, and then they get the credit report that they regularly checked, and they found out that they're in a lot more debt. So how would you handle that?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Well, so in that particular case, what you would probably do is cancel all the credit cards, and you would make notification to the credit card companies that you've canceled the credit cards. And then you would work with a credit agency to make one payment to address all of the other issues. And then you would not be able to, the two of you would sit down with a counselor and you'd say, until we can better handle our finances, we have no credit cards. You would just have a debit card. But in that case, you'd also need to have 2 separate checking accounts and 1 debit card for each checking account. I don't know. Melody, what do you think?
Problem is they refuse to sit down with counselors. I know a lot of people over the years. Well, many of them do. They're just like, oh my God, no, I'm not going to talk to you. Most of the time when they get in that situation, a lot of times they're just arguing. They're not even willing to communicate with each other on a civil basis anymore.
In this situation, it wasn't like that. It was a young couple, and you may call it financial abuse on his part, but I mean, it's her taking over financial abuse on her part, and I don't know. What were you going to say, Melody?
Yeah, I was trying to hand it to Melody for what does she tell her clients?
Well, if they're stuck in a situation where the partner absolutely refuses to participate and work with them, they have a choice to make. Are they willing to continue to allow this person to behave this way? It's kind of like they're cheating on them. They're cheating on them financially, right? And if
yes, that's how she felt.
Right. And if you're cheating on someone sexually, at some point you're going to decide you don't want to live like that. And I think it's got to be kind of equated to the same thing. You're being cheated on, you're being lied to, you're being abused, you're not being considered, you're being abandoned. And at that point, I think divorce has to be an option.
And what about just that one person who's being cheated on or financially abused? Control all of the finances for a while until they can trust that person again.
We'll have independence, and women do have the right, and men, to go out and create debt without their spouse knowing about it. And as long as that's true, and it's a good thing that it's true, because you certainly wouldn't want to be stuck in a place where you couldn't get credit if you wanted it. But as long as that's true, as long as there's that cheating going on, then you've got to accept the reality of it. And that's really hard. I mean, it's really tough for people. I've known people who go out and they just become they have an illness and they can't get themselves to work, but they refuse to get help. They refuse to go to therapy. They refuse to change anything. They don't do anything. I've had people who are going, I don't care if they don't work. They just need to go do something.
I just don't get where they get that mentality that all of a sudden you get married and now you're supported by somebody. Some of them don't even have kids. They're just like, hey, I'm not going to work anymore. I have a husband or a wife. I'm not going to work.
Right. And that's the spouse that's being abused that way really is going to have to make a choice, and it's a tough choice to make, but I also believe that you have to do what's right for you.
Yeah, I agree with that. Good word.
All right, we're gonna wrap it up. We're about at the end. Catherine, did you have any last minute words you wanted to add? Any other prenup ideas?
Oh, don't get me started on prenup. Also, there's something called postnups too. Parents should think about that. Even postnup is something you enter into an agreement even after you're married. And I think of it as a contract where you're each accountable to the other. And, marriage is really about two people. So while you have to do something right for you, when you enter into a marriage, you have to do what's right for both of you, which, can be tough.
And one last thing, in the state of Texas, you cannot make prenups or anything like that regarding custody of children. It is actually in the laws that you cannot do that.
Oh,
Well,
interesting. I didn't know that. I know there's some states, but I didn't know Texas was one of them.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us on the 6th episode of the 4 at 4, and hopefully you will join us next week, Thursday at 4 p.m. Bye, guys.
Bye.